Ooh, Fringy McCringe face, we're back. Right, and this is where Mr. Paul is probably going to start getting quite angry. His understanding of the orbital path of the Earth is wrong. Totally wrong. Doesn't fit observable reality. And Paul's approach to this is not the one of the scientist, despite his claims, but that of the tinfoil hat wearing nutbag. So, sorry, let's look at the facts. As we understand it, most of the other celestial bodies that are orbiting the Sun orbit on more or less the same plane. It's consistent with the idea of the accretion disk, which, as a concrete example, we have Saturn's rings and most of its moons, and we have the shape of our galaxy. In particular, right, the Earth orbits around the Sun with an inclination of 1.57 degrees from the best fit orbital plane for the planets, and that itself is inclined at 5 degrees or so from the Sun's equator. The Earth's axis of rotation is inclined at 23 and a bit degrees to that of the orbital plane. It moves a bit from time to time. And this, along with the various angles of planetary orbit, explain the positions of the planets in the sky, as observed for thousands of years, and of course, as any fool know, also explains the seasons, variations of length of daylight per latitude, and all of that jazz. So, it's not entirely unconceivable that the model we have is one of potentially many which could explain the observations we make. And that's what Paul's argument is that the current scientific model is no more correct than the geocentric models that were used in medieval orreries. It's not entirely unconceivable, but it's extremely, extremely unlikely. Now, this is a diagram by Paul of his current understanding of the Earth's orbit. According to him, the Earth orbits at 56.4 degrees from the Sun's equator, and its rotational axis is at 33 degrees from its orbital plane, or 23.4 degrees, 23.4 degrees from the Sun's equator. There is apparently some hitherto unknown and undiscernible force that is causing the Earth to oscillate along its rotational axis by exactly the distance between the tropics of Capricorn and Cancer, and that has a period of exactly one orbital period, i.e. a year. And that makes the Sun closer to the South Pole for half of the year and closer to the North Pole for half of the year, and that apparently explains the seasons. And this vertical oscillation, which according to Paul means that the tropics become the nearest point to the Sun, because this fixes his previous model, which had the rotational axis perpendicular to the lower inclined orbital plane and didn't move very much. So this would be quite interesting if it was true. It could have some fairly profound implications regarding the Earth's history. The Earth could be some extrasolar body that's been captured by the Sun, or it could have been pushed out of its original orbit by which would have been close to the accretion disk by a collision, or something like that. But it's not true, and it's quite horribly geometrically flawed and relies on unexplained and unknown forces. That this is nonsense should probably be unsurprising to anybody who saw the previous video, because if you take Paul's data points and extrapolate from those, well, it's garbage in, garbage out. Yeah. So the astute observer might have noticed that Paul's diagram is not exactly to scale, and like with Flerfer's, scale is about to show itself as being very, very significant. So, what's he claiming? So, the first version of his model, which I'll show here, claimed that the Earth was orbiting at 23.4 degrees, and he still had his axial oscillation he had the Earth's rotational axis orthogonal to its orbital plane. If you do the maths on this, you find that the tropics become rather close to the equator, within about 200 meters of the equator, in fact.
Oops.
But I kind of pointed that out, and a few other people pointed it out as well on his video, which I've linked below. And so he changed his model. Now, his latest model is the one that I've just described above, with the 56.4, blah 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 blah, which brings things a bit more reasonable, makes things a bit more reasonable, but not entirely. He claims that the axial oscillation moves the tropics back to their observed locations at 23-ish degrees, as opposed to the 33 degrees that they would be otherwise with a 33-degree inclination relative to the orbital plane. But in reality, it doesn't work that way. It's all down to scale. The distance from the equator to one or other of the tropics, you can get that by simple trigonometry. That's going to give you the vertical oscillation over half of a period. We're going to break this down into geometry. So if you make a right angle triangle with a point A at the centre of the Earth, point B on one of the tropics, and point C on the equatorial plane, the angle CAB is 23.5 degrees, as we know, because that's the angle to the tropics. Sine's the opposite over the hypotenuse, so the distance we want is the Earth's radius multiplied by sin 23.5, which is about 6,400-ish kilometres multiplied by about 4.4, which gives you about 2,500 kilometres. So he's talking about a 2,500 kilometre shift either side of the equator over the period of a year. Now, he's postulating a 33-degree tilt of the axis relative to the orbital plane, so that actually makes the actual movement relative to the orbital plane 2,500 times the cos of 33, which is about 2,100 kilometres. Now, this diagram shows his model. So at the winter solstice at the top left, the Earth's centre is 2,100 odd kilometres above the orbital plane, and at the summer solstice at the bottom right, the Earth's centre is 2,100 odd kilometres below the orbital plane. That looks an awful lot like an orbit through the centres, the displaced centres of the Earth, rather than being an orbit with a displacement. And that would just basically make the orbital plane slightly inclined relative to Paul's plane, and you would then have the rotational axis of the Earth very slightly inclined relative to that 33 degrees that he's claiming. In fact, it would be inclined by the difference between the angle of Paul's plane of orbit at 56.4 and the new plane of orbit that runs through the centre of the Earth. Now, it was easier to work out when he had his angle of rotation orthogonal to the orbital plane. But in fact, that gives a boundary for what we're doing here. We don't actually need an exact result. We can just pretend it's all right angle triangles and let it rip. So what we can say is that we've got this big right angle triangle with the adjacent of the right angle triangle being the Earth's orbital radius, which is 150 million kilometres or so. And the opposite of that triangle is the 2,100 kilometres or so of orbital motion, of axial motion that he's claiming. In fact, it would be less because we've gone further. Yeah, but if we leave it at 2,500 kilometres, which is the maximum that we're going to get that motion, we can then take a tangent. So we've got 150 million kilometres on one side. We've got 2,500 on the other side. Tangent's the opposite of the adjacent. So the angle that we're talking about here is the arctangent of 2500 over 150 million, which is about a thousandth of a degree, or 3 arcseconds.
Oops.
Now, the tropics are where the sun can be seen directly overhead, and they're a direct result of the inclination of the Earth relative to its orbital plane. So, if the Earth is inclined at 33 degrees plus or minus 3 arcseconds, then the tropics will be at 33 degrees plus or minus 3 arcseconds. That's what Paul's model is proposing. Again, it's scale. Scale comes in, the fact that the orbital radius of the Earth is so enormous compared to everything else. So we can put the tropics at 33 degrees and let the arcseconds slip. Frankly, you're not going to worry about them too much, which makes Florida tropical. Right? Global warming. Hey. Seriously though, Paul's model doesn't work in terms of what you can observe about the sun. It breaks the observed locations of the planets as well. It's basically geometrically buggered. Now, Mr. Paul has previously suggested to me in one of his comments that my criticisms of his earlier model, which is now amended to this one, amounted to refusing a Ming vase because it was cracked. Now, this is not refusing a Ming vase, this is refusing what's being sold as a Ming vase. And because you've realised that it's actually half of a plastic toy out of a Christmas cracker that the dog's eaten, that's been fished out of a dog turd and been slightly cleaned. So, where does all this come from? Well, not directly, as far as I can tell from Leedskalnin. He did write some stuff about being unfooled by his machines, but by his megalithic stuff. But apart from that, he doesn't seem to have written anything particularly significant about the orbit of the Earth. And like I said in the first video, he's basically a blank page for people to put their fringe madness onto. I think this is mostly Paul's idea. He's extrapolated it by deciphering some very badly eroded and rusted artifacts, and gone from there. I might be wrong about that. No, I don't know. I would say that it comes from years of being sure that Leedskalnin was some sort of hidden genius. Years of trying to extract this hidden truth that isn't there. Years of seeing patterns where there aren't any and connections where there aren't any. And it's sad because instead of publishing a very interesting book, biography of this rather intriguing figure of Leedskalnin, who's been largely ignored, Paul's gone straight into this overlooked Ubermensch idea, into the idea that Leedskalnin could have advanced science enormously. He's gone into the idea that Paul is the one true initiate capable of deciphering this greatness, the disciple who's ready to spread that truth to the world. It seems to have ingrained itself into him so deeply that I don't think he could admit anything is wrong about it, and he could gnaw off both his legs and dance a jig. Now, I was going to leave it here because it seemed unfair to start talking about what Paul said to me, particularly in terms of what I've said to him, and because he is apparently autistic, I think it would be unfair to do it. But he's just sent me a very, very nice email.
Teletubbies! Teletubbies!
Oops.